We talk all the time on this show about different views of the economy and of society. One view, libertarian sort of view, that the market should rule individual freedom versus what I consider the progressive view, which is the commons. And you've heard Tom Hartman, you've heard me talk about the commons and social justice. Our next guest is going to talk about that with his great new book. Our guest is Professor Michael Sandel. He is the Ann T. and Robert M. Mass Professor of Government at Harvard University. His work has been the subject of TV series on PBS and the BBC. If you know, he teaches a course called Justice at Harvard. You've seen that on TV, perhaps. His newest book is called What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets. Professor Sandel will be at Powell's on Burnside tomorrow night. That's Thursday at 7:30. Professor, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you on, and love the book. I was talking about it earlier on the show. Essentially, you're talking about a market economy here, moving to a market society, which is not necessarily in the best interest of the commons. And I'd like to start with the discussion in your book you had about line standing and concierge medicine, if you will.
Yes. Well, more and more these days, it's possible to pay to get to the head of the line. It's true at the airport and those long lines for the security checkpoint. Mm-hmm. It's true at amusement parks. Back in the old days, part of going to an amusement park was standing in a long line with everybody else for the popular rides. No more. Now you can pay more and go to the head of the line. And that's true in more consequential aspects of life as well, including medical care. Mm-hmm. The advent of concierge or boutique physician practices, as they call them, where some doctors cut the rolls of their patients to those few who are willing to pay an annual retainer fee, $2,500 up to $25,000 a year, in exchange for same-day appointments, the cell phone number of your doctor. So in a way, we now have a practice where you can buy your way to the head of the line, not just in the airport and the amusement park, but for medical care.
And you point out, Professor, that there are consequences to that. That means that others are going to slow up in the queue. It's going to affect others and their ability to get to a limited number of doctors.
Right. That's true with the medical care, because those patients who can't afford to pay the hefty annual retainer fee have to go on to the crowded rolls of other doctors who then have to rush to, these quick 10-minute appointments sometimes. That's right. Because the reimbursement rates for general practitioners are so low.
So Professor, the kind of way I set it up at the macro view at the beginning of this head of this interview, that really this is kind of a market view of individual freedom, libertarian, if you will, versus maximizing social welfare in many cases, right?
Well, there is a libertarian view that says markets involve free exchange, and so people should be free to exchange whatever goods they want to. And then there arise hard moral questions. Does that mean we should have an organ in a sale, buying and selling organs, right, like kidneys for transplantation? That's illegal now, but some libertarians say people should be free to buy and sell kidneys. And the question is, how far do we want to take the market logic into what spheres of life and what other values can be corrupted or crowded out if we put everything up for sale?
Right. Our guest is Harvard professor Michael Sandel, the author of What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets. The professor will be at Powell's on Burnside tomorrow night at 7:30. Learn more at justiceharvard.org. That's justiceharvard.org. Professor, I love this story in the book, the coverage of this village in Switzerland that voted to be a repository for nuclear waste. Talk about common good and public spirit versus money for this. Explain that.
It's a good example of how sometimes a cash incentive can crowd out civic virtues. Mm-hmm. They had to locate nuclear wastes somewhere in Switzerland, and they had identified a small town in the mountains as probably the safest place. But the community had to agree, so they did a survey and said, would you vote to accept it if the parliament chose this town? 51% said yes, even though they knew it was risky. It was a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Then they asked a follow-up question where they sweetened the deal. They said, suppose the parliament chooses your town and offers to pay every resident of the town an amount of money every year as a form of compensation. Then would you accept it? Now, how many do you think were willing to accept it this time?
Well, I know the answer.
You know the answer. Now, standard economic reasoning would say more.
Right.
Actually, it was less.
Right.
The number of people dropped in half from 51%, who now with the financial offer, only 25% said they would accept it. Now, from the standpoint of standard economic reasoning, this is a paradox. If you offer people money to do something, you expect that more of them will be willing to do it, not fewer. What happened here, I think, is that turning this into a financial transaction crowded out the civic virtue that informed the first vote. They asked people who changed their minds, why not now? You're being offered money. They said, we didn't want to be bribed. So what we had in the first vote, a majority were willing, out of a sense of public responsibility, the common good, to accept this sacrifice. But
public spirit.
But once you turn it into a financial transaction, offering to pay them, well, that crowded out, that corrupted the sense that this is a matter of the common good. It became a simple financial transaction, and far fewer were willing to undergo a sacrifice for money.
And so to put that Swiss story or Swiss lesson into perspective, this is what you're talking about, where the people of this village, at least, didn't want to be a market society.
Exactly, and this comes up time and again. This one small example illustrates a bigger point, which is central to the book, and it's that we need to debate as a society where markets and market values serve the public good and where they don't belong. You know, we're in many school districts now. We're offering school children money, cash incentives to try to motivate them to get good grades or score well on standardized tests. In Dallas, they pay third graders $2 for each book they read. Now, there's a debate about this. On the one hand, some say, let's do anything that will improve the academic performance of kids from poor backgrounds, which is where most of these experiments are taking place. On the other hand, do we really want to teach young kids that reading a book or studying hard is something you get paid for? It's a chore. And is there the risk that if we send that message, it will crowd out what we ultimately want to teach, which is the intrinsic love of reading and of learning?
You know, I get a sense, Professor, I mean, we talk on this show about, you know, we're not anti-capitalism as progressives. We're anti-runaway capitalism. We want common sense regulation, and what we've seen over 30 years now is deregulation of capitalism and large corporations in this country to the detriment of the whole. I think that is clear. You sense, and you're not anti-capitalistic. I've read the book, but we're talking about common sense regulation here, right?
Yes, and I think it's important to distinguish. You make a very important point. It's not being anti-capitalist to raise the question, where do markets belong and where may they crowd out other valuable non-market goods? It's the difference, and this is what I think has been happening to our society over the past 3 decades. We've drifted, almost without realizing it, from having a market economy to becoming a market society. The difference is a market economy is a tool. It's a valuable and effective tool for organizing productive activity. A market society, though, is a place where everything is up for sale. It's a way of life where market values seep into every nook and cranny of life and sometimes corrupt or crowd out other values that we care about.
Our guest, Harvard professor Michael Sandel, you can meet him and hear about his book tomorrow night at Pals on Burnside. JusticeHarvard.org is the website. The book is What Money Can't Buy. Professor, we're over time, but I have to tell you about, I think it was maybe 3 years on this show, I just went absolutely ballistic, and I really don't go ballistic much, when the city of Louisville decided to have KFC would pay to fill potholes in that town in return for the KFC logo being painted on the street where they filled the pothole. I have cringed over the years as collegiate sports have been logoized, or you call it the skyboxification of America.
Right.
This not only is to me a market society, it cheapens what a public servant, what a municipality ought to be doing for its citizens. And I'm glad you included in the book this kind of municipal marketing.
Yeah, there are loads and loads of examples. The book is a book, in a way, I suppose, about philosophy, public philosophy, our civic life. But it's loaded with examples, some funny, some troubling, of the reach of markets into municipal life, civic life, personal relations, even family life, so that the goal is to invite us to step back as a society and have the kind of debate we have not had in recent decades about where do markets serve the public good,
right,
and where do they not belong?
And increasingly, you can't have that debate with polarized radio talk show hosts who say, "Oh, the president's a Marxist." End of story. I mean,
right,
and I mean that on both sides, but particularly right wing radio, where you cannot have a debate such as this, philosophical, economic, or otherwise, because we're such a hot button society now. And I actually think this is one of the most important books I have read in a long time. I highly recommend it. The author is Harvard professor Michael Sandel. You can meet him at Powell's tomorrow night in Burnside. All of you KPOJers, get out at 7:30 tomorrow. The website, justiceharvard.org. The book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you.